Good morning.
Good morning.
This morning, I'm going to continue talking about Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva Way, chapter 6. And the sections that we're talking about cover verses 13 through 21, which I've characterized as acceptance of suffering to build patience. So this chapter is about building patience. The first verse that I'm going to do is this one: there is nothing whatsoever that is not made easier through acquaintance. So through becoming acquainted with small harms, I should learn to practice to patiently accept greater harms. There's nothing whatsoever that is not made easier through acquaintance. So through becoming acquainted with small harms, I should learn to patiently accept greater harms. So one of the ways that I've kind of talked about this over the years is this idea about how we practice with smaller problems to build muscles, right? This idea that when we have to deal with something that's really difficult, then we've developed the muscles to be able to lift the weight of that problem that we might have. So Shantideva is saying if we relate to the small problems, the small irritations that we have, and we cultivate patience around those irritations, the things that make us feel uncomfortable, these are things that are not harmful to us, that we can start to develop patience gradually. And so, for example, something I've talked about before is this idea that you go to somebody's house for dinner, maybe you eat something that you don't like. And you're not allergic to it, you just don't like it, but you eat it because that's a polite thing to do. So that would be an example of doing something that maybe you didn't necessarily want to do, but it was the right thing or skillful thing to do. Or maybe you're in traffic, right? And you're cultivating patience by letting go of wanting things to be different. Like when I drove over here, I was behind a woman who was driving very slowly. I would have liked it had she been driving faster. So there was an opportunity for me to practice patience with myself and for her. So we accept hunger or cold, maybe when we're a little cold, we're a little hungry, and we just go ahead and keep doing what we're doing and accept the experience that we're having. So that we pay attention, notice our impatience with maybe greedy desires that we may have. Like, for example, when we go to the checkout line at the grocery store or somewhere else, there's always candy, even at the hardware store. It's like you're checking out and there's all these little things that they're going, eat me, feed me. So if you're attracted to that kind of thing, maybe, you need to practice. One little practice would be practicing patience in that moment and not being greedy, if you will, and letting go of that and just not buying that thing or whatever that might be. So we live in a very commercialized culture in which people are always trying to sell us something, get us to do something, and that we are told that if we buy stuff and get stuff, that we're going to be happier people. So this way that we can cultivate patience and equanimity around that by maybe not following every little whim that we have, and that we slow down and we actually catch ourselves in these moments that we're engaged in. That kind of happened to me the other day at New Leaf. I was looking at those, those old chocolate balls they have wrapped up in cellophane, and I was looking at those going, that looks interesting. And then I thought, no, you really don't want that. It's just that this idea of buying some little thing, and to kind of cultivate this sense of patience with this sort of innate, in my case, around these little chocolate balls, innate greed, to want to buy one of these, so that we actually pay attention to that. So this importance of working with small irritants and turning them into practice. We can do this with people we don't like, that we look at that person and actually try to remember and recall the things that are really good or important about them as well. So maybe in Zazen. Zazen's a great way to cultivate patience. Because one of the things about group practice is you come to the Zendo and you sit in the morning, we sit for 40 minutes. So you come to the Zendo and you're not going to get up in the middle of Zazen. There's this kind of group thing that happens where you're encouraged to stay in your seat. So even if you're feeling impatient, you still stay because that's what you've been told that you're supposed to do. So that's a real incentive in group practice to continue to just stay there. And that is an act of patience. Or when your nose itches in Zazen, you don't scratch your nose, you just sit there and let it itch, and it's amazing, it goes away. Like the next thing you know, you're thinking about something else and your nose doesn't itch anymore. So these are ways that we cultivate, specifically in Zazen, we cultivate a kind of patience. So the point of the practice is to work on ways to calm our minds, to work on ways to develop equanimity and patience. And so in that way, when something big comes along, we're able to actually have the tools and have the practice to be able to work with whatever that is. Okay. The next verse, I think, is kind of a hard verse. So here's the verse. Some people, when they see their own blood, become especially brave and steady. But when they see the blood of others, they faint and fall unconscious. These reactions come from the mind being either steady or timid. Therefore, I should disregard harms caused to me and not be affected by suffering. So I'll read it to you again. Yeah, you've already got a skeptical look on your face soon. So the verse is, some, when they see their own blood, become especially brave and steady, but some, when they see the blood of others, faint and fall unconscious. These reactions come from the mind being either steady or timid. Therefore, I should disregard harms caused to me and not be affected by suffering. So I think our natural response to this is to go, hey, wait a minute, a lot of the stuff in this chapter, that is people's response. This text is has been repeatedly commented on, especially by Tibetan practitioners and teachers, because this is a major teaching. Shantideva's text, this is a major teaching in the Tibetan tradition. So just to say that if we can get over our skepticism about what Shantideva is trying to convey, it's very helpful in a very steps and stages way, which I hope that as we study this text, we'll see that. Okay, so some, when they see their own blood, become especially brave and steady, but when they see the blood of others, they faint and fall unconscious. So here, what he's trying to say is that the responses that we have to things are individual responses. They're our responses, and they're based on things like culture, our physicality, our personal conditions, that kind of thing. Just kind of genetically, our personalities, whatever that might be. So some people, when they see blood, they're freaked out about it. In this case, they faint. And other people, they're like, okay, yeah, blood, not a problem for me. And we hope that those people are medical people. So, so the whole idea here is that what bothers you doesn't necessarily bother me, and so that there is this way in which we acknowledge that our own the things that we like or dislike, or the things that bother us or don't bother us, or irritate or don't bother us, are actually predicated often on personal likes and dislikes, not on some kind of external thing. So I'll give you an example. There was a guy at San Francisco Zen Center who was very much liked, and I didn't like him. And I didn't like him because I was on the officers and directors, and because I knew that he had problems with practice, and I was pretty judgmental about that. And he wasn't, kind of following the rules. And so I didn't like him. And I'd been studying this stuff. And one day I was sitting in the dining room, all these people loved him. He was so loved by all these people. And I'm like going, I thought to myself, what's up with this? I don't like him. Like, so why doesn't everybody else not like him? I don't like him. So what's going on with this? And I realized because he was a very loving person, because people really responded to him because he was generous and loving and accepting of other people. And I thought, okay, I don't like him because of some ideas I have about being critical about how he conducts himself in formal practice. But that is not the total sum of this person. This is just one little piece of who they are. And if I look at who he actually is, I see this person who is very much loved by other people around him because he is so generous in his own response to other people. So that was a real awakening experience for me to realize, oh, this is a story that I'm making up. That the story wants to define this person as the whole of this person based on a very small piece of what I know about this person. So that was actually quite helpful for me. So that's one way of looking at this verse. So we can flip the verse and we can say, when some people see their own blood, they become faint and afraid. And when they see other people's blood, they are calm and immediately know how to respond. So one commentary about this is the Dalai Lama's commentary about this verse, as he points out, he says that this verse is about attachment to self, which I thought was interesting. He said, when we perceive that we are injured and we want to protect ourselves, then we immediately become proactive, right? Because we want to protect the self. But when it's another person, maybe we don't have so much empathy. Maybe we run away because we don't want to deal with anything that's uncomfortable for us. So in that way, that kind of offends our sensibilities. So in that way, he's saying this verse is a way that Shantideva is actually talking to us about the nature of maybe how we're trying to protect our small self. So that's another way. And the reason I'm bringing these up is because I want you to see that how we respond to these verses just right off the top of our head is not necessarily the most nuanced way to understand what Shantideva is talking about here. Because remember, what he's talking about is how to cultivate patience. That's what the point here is about these verses. Another commentary says that our response to blood is not the fault of the blood. So that's an interesting way. It's not that we're responding to blood, but blood itself is just blood being itself, right? But we're having these different responses to it. So he says, blood is just doing what blood does. Therefore, it isn't what actually happens to us that's affecting our equanimity. It's our response, our mental response or emotional response that's affecting our equanimity. It's not the thing, it's not the blood itself. It's our response to it that's creating our lack of equanimity. So Shantideva here is saying that as we practice, we can transform these responses that we have, and we can find more peace of mind and wisdom. Now I can tell from looking at you that you guys are like going, oh, right, I'm not so sure about all this. But I can tell you from personal experience that if you practice with this stuff, you will experience transformation. If you practice with cultivating patience in situations where it's not harmful to you, you're just irritated. If you start to actually look at that as a practice and ask yourself, why am I irritated about the fact this person's driving slower than I want them to drive? Who's suffering? Who's suffering? They're not suffering. Who's suffering? And who is the cause of that suffering? I'm the cause of that suffering, right? In and of itself, there doesn't need to be any suffering in that situation. Who's suffering when I am being critical of somebody because I know something about them or have some judgment about them that may or may not be that is not may or may not be, is not the whole person. Who's suffering for their judgment? Who's suffering for this ill will that's being created by this kind of mind? So this stuff works if you're willing to do the practice. It's a hard practice though, because it drives it all back into the self and how we're responding. Okay, so this part, you probably, when he said disregard harm and not be affected by suffering. So what's this about? Because I think this is the hardest part about this verse here. So what he's trying to say here is that we can change, we can transform. It doesn't mean that we should accept harmful actions and shrug off our own suffering or the suffering of others. That's not what Shantideva is trying to say here. It means that we do not have to be trapped by our previous responses. That's what he's trying to say here. In the past, you may have been brave in the face of your own suffering, but you can't deal with the suffering of others. So that's going back to the discussion about seeing blood. Your mind may be steady in one situation and unbalanced in another situation. So the goal is to find equanimity. That's the point of this, is to find equanimity in our lives. So when he says disregard harm, he's talking about finding equanimity. When he says not be affected by suffering, he's saying find your equanimity. He's not saying don't do anything about it. So the good news here about what Shantideva is saying is that he's saying to us, you are the master of your mind. You are the person who can bring about transformation. The bad news, of course, is that we are the masters of our mind and we are the ones who are responsible for transformation. That's the bummer about the whole thing. So it's easier to feel that we have no control of our feelings and blame others, and to make others responsible for our problems. So on one level, that makes us very comfortable because it absolves us from our responsibility and we can become passive victims. Now, I want to do a caveat to this because I think this is really important. Now, I think Shantideva was probably, patience is an antidote to anger. I think Shantideva was probably an angry guy. So angry people, by and large, and I would say that has been my primary affliction. Angry people, so I know what I'm talking about. Angry people are angry and they know they're right. And when you know you're right, that's a problem because it means you're absolutely convinced that your idea is the right idea, therefore you do not have to change. So there in and of itself is the nutshell of suffering. So I just want to say, I think Shantideva really understood that. And when you think you're right all the time, sometimes you have to get knocked up the side of your head to realize that you're not right. So I think what he's doing here is this very heavy duty kind of tough love thing here in these verses. Remember we read earlier, those other verses? Weren't they wonderful? You know, about may I be a bridge, may I be other place he says, may I be like a doctor who heals those who are sick and that kind of thing. So that is that very generous way of being, is very generous talking. But here he's more like, you know. So he's saying that the antidote to our suffering, to these kinds of experiences that he's discussing, is to face and acknowledge that we have been deeply harmed and affected. Okay, excuse me, I left a paragraph out here. Okay, this is what I want to say in response to what Shantideva is saying and add this, which is some of us have been victims of abuse. Some people have been victims of being abused as children or in abusive relationships or something like that. So some people have been victims of other people's actions. So in that case, I want to acknowledge that. And so if we are abused as children, for example, those experiences are going to probably stay with us for the rest of our lives. If we've experienced PTSD, those experiences are going to stay with us for the rest of our lives. I was watching PBS News last night on television, and there was a man who was I don't know, I think he was maybe a pediatrician, and he was in Gaza, and he was talking about children starving in Gaza, and they were showing us pictures of starving children. And he was talking about this, and if you looked in his eyes, you could see that this man was never going to recover from this experience of treating starving children in Gaza. He had that look in his eyes. It was chilling to see how deeply he has been affected by this experience. We cannot discount this and just say, oh, that's okay. You should have another mindset. You should be another way. You shouldn't be affected by this kind of thing, because we're deeply affected. And yet, can we heal from this? Even though we carry this for the rest of our lives, how can we heal from this? How can we take this kind of experience and turn it into an experience that's an experience of healing for the self and for others as well? So that's the question here. And when that happens, it has to involve taking responsibility ourselves for our own minds in order to heal our mind, right? In the West, we go to therapy. What do we do when we go to therapy? We examine the content and our emotions that come from our own mind. And we try to learn and change and heal and redefine that. So this is the kind of thing he's talking about, but of course, he's talking about it as an 8th century Buddhist monk. So he's being very tough here. But I just want to add this caveat here to this kind of thing that he's talking about. So when he says not being affected by suffering, he's talking about not being pulled around by our suffering, which is different than saying not being affected. And if I were going to really go into this, I would try to go in and find out what was being translated as the word affected here, right? What he was actually saying. So sometimes so now I'm going to kind of be a little less heavy here. Sometimes, we get pulled around by our suffering to the point where we think we just can't stand it. Have you ever had that experience? It's like you just, I've got to do something. I've got to do something. And that in and of itself is a kind of suffering that just sort of drives you nuts, like I've got to get up and do something. And so he's saying, this is exactly when you need to sit down. This is exactly when you need to do nothing. This is when we need to take a deep breath, I think I need to take a deep breath right now. Just, take a deep breath and settle into our body. Go outside, listen to the birds, take a breath. Because when we do that, and we can cultivate some balance, mental balance, at that point, when we do something, we're much more likely to do something that's skillful than we are to do something that's harmful. So this not being affected by suffering, he's saying, don't be pulled around by your suffering. Practice demands a lot of us, a lot from us. So, for example, it's really hard to enact the precepts. It's a really hard practice to enact the precepts. And it's really hard to become skillful in the midst of our delusion when we're being pulled around by our delusion. So we have to wake up to what we do. We have to acknowledge that what we're doing in certain situations is not working. And we have to make an effort to practice with that. And we also have to make an effort for each other to be generous in the face of each other's unskillfulness and suffering. So it's absolutely, these verses and this practice is not about abusing, belittling, or beating up the self. If you find yourself doing those things, why would you want to practice, right? It's like, if you are in a situation where you feel like I want to be really clear, doing these practices is not about beating yourself up. It's not about abusing the self. It's not about beating other people up. Because if that's what we're doing in practice, then why do it? What's the point of it? I hope that everybody's sane enough to say to themselves, I'm not going to do something that hurts my psyche. I'm not going to sit around and tell myself I'm a bad person. This is about gently, even though Shantideva, I have to admit, is not very gentle. This is about really looking at what we're doing and saying, is it workable or isn't it workable? It's much easier to think about the word workable, not good or bad. Does this work in this situation? Is my response working or not working? Is it creating a problem or is it helping? And if it's creating a problem, what's my participation in this? And these are techniques that Shantideva is saying, if you do these practices, if you develop these practices, you will be more skillful. If you work with small irritations, you will be more skillful. If you wake up to the way you're being pulled around by your anxiety or impatience or suffering, you are going to be more able to do that. If you acknowledge that you have PTSD or that you're in an abusive situation or things like that, and take, that's one of the great things about Western psychology, is that, people are working on how do we heal these situations. So that we acknowledge that and work with that. And we allow other people to have the space to bang around a little bit. Suzuki Roshi said, practice is like a big field, right? You can roam around this big field. The field has fences around it. Eventually you're going to run into a fence, but that there's this kind of, we want to give each other a bigger field to operate in than some kind of narrow little box that we put people in, because nobody likes to be put into a little box, and told who they are. So that we cultivate this. Okay, so then Shantideva says, one of the verses in this section is, even when the wise are suffering, their minds remain very lucid and undefiled. For when war is being waged against the disturbing conceptions, much harm is caused at the time of battle. Okay. Even when the wise are suffering, their minds remain very lucid and undefiled. For when war is being waged against the disturbing conceptions, much harm is caused at the time of battle. So first of all, he says, even when the wise are suffering. So for me, this indicates that even wise people suffer, right? So this doesn't mean that you never suffer. Dogen says in Genjo Koan, we grieve when flowers fall. And even in aversion, weeds spread. So it's like there's always a sense of, we live in the subtle world, we grieve for things. We wish things were a different way. He says, but even the wise suffer. So I think that's important to keep that in mind. And then one of the things that the example I'm giving here is about the wise suffering is, which I'm not sure, is driving on Highway 17. Have you been in one of those deals where the traffic's backed up almost half the length of 17, and you know that you're stuck there unless you can get off on that old San Jose road, and there you are. So it's like that we here, we give ourselves the chance to just relax, let it go, just accept the situation as it is. But the thing that I think is more important here is to talk about when war is being waged against the disturbing conceptions, much harm is caused at the time of battle. So here, some people are really put off by the idea of war and battles, that this is some kind of violent event. But what he's trying to talk or point to here is he's saying that when you're in the middle of dealing with one of these, dealing with impatience or dealing with some klesha, when you're in the middle of this thing, it's a struggle. It's a struggle to work with your mind. And this is what he means when he talks about being in a battle. And I think I've given this example before, But when I was at Tassajara, there was a woman from Germany who was there who I really, really, really didn't like. And she didn't like me very much either. And we would like yell at each other, literally, you know. And one time the Shiso had to come out from the study hall during silent time and tell us to be quiet. So I just really dislike this person. And if you've ever been to Tassajara during a practice period, it's like you're right on top of people. You know, you know what the sound of their feet sound like. You're in the Zendo and you hear them walking down the trail and you know it's that person, you know, and that person is coming into the Zendo and that person is making this kind of noise and doing this and how they put their shoes away. No, right? So there's lots of activity there that you can really generate and gin up a lot of bad feelings for somebody. And so I was reading Shantideva, I was reading this chapter, and I would sit there in my room and I'd say to myself, what is your vow? Oh, my vow is to be generous and to be compassionate. And the other side of me would say, I cannot stand this person. I really dislike this person. She did this, she did that, she did this, she did that. And then I go, no, remember your vow. You want to do this practice. You want to be patient. You want to do this. No, I don't care about being patient. I'm really upset. That is battle, right? That's like being in a struggle. What is that Christian thing about, was Jacob and the angel? It's like, that's a struggle that you're going through. That's a battle that you're going through. And sometimes that's what you have to do. You have to sit down and struggle with the small self and say, remember what my vow is. Remember, I want to do this practice. I'm here because I want to do the practice. Not because I want to drink tea and eat cookies, although that's very nice. But, you know, I want to be here in this Sangha. I want to be in this relationship with other people. And that's going to include people that I may not necessarily get along with. So that's a struggle. But what Shantideva is saying here is that he says, when war is being waged against the disturbing conceptions, okay, the war that's being waged is against the, I don't want to do this. The war that's being waged is against, I hate that person. They're stupid, they're this, they're that. Or I don't like myself. You can wage that war too, because nobody deserves that. You can wage the same war with yourself and say, I don't deserve to talk to myself that way. I'm not stupid. I'm not whatever the negative thing is. So that's the battle. And he says, the war is being waged against the disturbing conceptions. Much harm is caused to those disturbing conceptions when you engage with them and do that struggle. Because hopefully, in the end, where you come out is having done the practice and transformed into something that is more skillful, more wholesome, more helpful, less suffering, right? Hopefully that's where, and that you come talk to your teachers about it, you know, and say, I'm really struggling with this. I cannot get out of this rut. And they can say, well, how about this? How about this? Jaku and I can say, how about this? How about this? What about this practice? You know, sometimes we say, oh, you don't like this person? How about taking their picture and putting them on the altar? Right? Oh, they don't deserve that. You know? So if we can do this, this is really tough practice. And if we can do this, we will experience transformation. Then the last verse is, furthermore, suffering has good qualities. Through being disheartened with it, arrogance is dispelled. Compassion arises for those in cyclic existence. Evil is shunned and joy is found in virtue. So he says, when we do this practice, when we engage in this suffering, our own suffering, and our own looking at ourselves, causes us to dispel our arrogance. You know, it causes us to experience humility and compassion towards other people. It causes us to see that we're all caught in this kind of thing. And we want to let go of that. His evil is shunned. Evil is a tough word, in Buddhism because of the Christian connotations, but this letting go of, what is not helpful, coming back to the three pure precepts, which are avoid doing harm, cultivate what is good, and benefit all beings. That we keep coming back to that as a kind of vow in a very specific way, but generally it's a great thing to say to ourselves, don't I really want to avoid doing harm? Don't I really want to be skillful? Don't I really want to cultivate skillfulness in myself? Which, by the way, as the more we do that, it also helps other people as well. The person we're dealing with, it helps them as well to be skillful with them and benefit all beings. So practicing with patience creates a kind of equanimity, and we'll find ourselves suffering less and benefiting self and others as well. Thank you.